session 5, I featured a project similar to this, and I wanted to do a side project making a clock similar, using my design that I used in the project for a more durable clock, and not so much affiliated with the session, but just as a side project for you to express yourself in your creative ways. You do not have to use my design. I just happen to like starbursts, so that's why I chose that design. And if you use the wooden clock face, I do not know if you can paint on this very well, but I want to be sure that my paint will adhere, so I'm going to use gesso. I'm not going to pour it on there. It's very much like marshmallow cream in texture, and I don't know why the lid wants to stick in there, which makes a mess. But I'm going to start applying a coat of gesso, and you'll find it doesn't look as nice as paint, and it's not meant to. It's meant to make the surface more friendly for paint. And so I'm using my gesso and varnish brush to smear that on. And I'm going to use a palette knife to clean out the areas that the gesso went down in, so it's not stuck in there drying, becoming a hindrance later for the project. And it may take more than one coat, and between coats, when it dries, I may sand it down smooth before adding another coat. And I would have done this ahead of time, but I felt that if you've never done any of this kind of work, you may want to see what it looks like. You want to always have plenty of toweling or something on hand when you work with messy projects like this, because they are indeed messy. And I may be able to clean some of that out later, but I don't trust it because I found gesso can dry fairly solid. And then I can just use the palette knife to smooth that out. So, do that. The only reason I'm keeping it filming while I'm doing this is because you may do this project, have a similar problem, and want to see how to resolve it. And that's pretty much how you do it. Clean it out. I don't know if a Q-tip will work because I think it'll mop up some of the gesso that you want on there. Of course, the good thing about it is it's for underneath the paint. So if you got a little bit of unevenness, it might not make a difference. However, I want this on my wall. It's my expression. So I do want it to look, you know, fairly nice. And I think it will. Now we'll just even that out. Take the brush, get a little. And you may have to do this a few times, you know, clean out, rebrush, whatever. But after the first coat, it shouldn't be as bad. Okay, what's going to happen is that's going to dry. I'm going to smooth it out, add some more gesso. But that's the first step, and we'll go from there. Okay, my gesso dried. I did sand a little bit on it. Now, if you want to use sandpaper, this is 60, number 60 sandpaper, kind of coarse. I don't have to go over it very much. It's just to get the spots that are extra thick out. But it's definitely going to need a second coat of the gesso. And this time, I'm going to be a little more careful around the numbers because I really didn't enjoy picking the gesso out of the numbers. But I wanted to get an even coat, at least the first coat, to be pretty even. So that meant having to go a little bit around the numbers. Or I can put on a little thinner around that area. But you can tell it's more opaque at the second around. And I'll wipe off some extra when time comes. I'm just going to go gently around those numbers. Because really where the most of my paint will be going is around the center anyway. So, I want you to see how I do this in case you follow along and want to do it the same way. I don't want to leave anything out that you might find to be an important step later. That wouldn't be very nice, would it? Okay, that one's going to need a little love, maybe the 12. And any uneven spots I'll be sanding off. I don't think I'll need more than 2 coats, because all I needed to do is to keep the paint stuck on there and not have to do anything too drastic to it outside of that. Okay, I think we did pretty good that time with the mess around the numbers, and I can clean it up more later with various means, a toothpick or something. That gets rid of the worst of it. Just so I notice when it dries, it's kind of like a dried glue texture to me. Every time I gesso something, I have to unstick it from my, what I call my gesso mat. You can see where I've used it extensively. But that's all there is to it. And then that'll have to dry. I'll sand any rough spots out, and then we'll get to the fun part, the paint. Oh no, one step in between. I can't follow straight lines unless I have a guide, so I'll show you how to do that in a little bit. Well, my gesso's dry, it's smooth. I may have to sand one more little piece off. There, I think that's a little better. And the sandpaper lasts a long time. Anyway, we're ready for the next fun step. This is called trace down paper, and I get the non-waxy kind, and you can use it several times. You don't have to use it once and throw it away. It works best at the first time, but this one's going to last a long time. And I'm going to use that instead of my method I used on the other video, simply because I'm going to use acrylic, and sometimes the pencil markings, if your pencil's waxy in any way, it will make it hard for the paint to stick, and I definitely don't want that to happen with this project. And as with the video, I use a lot of things for straight edges, and this is what I'm going to use right now. Because when I trace, I don't trace very neatly. Unfortunately, I'm just not really that great at it. And as you've seen with the gesso, I'm also a sloppy painter. So, I don't know where that starts and ends. I got to move the trace down around a little bit. But anyway, the next step is to get your pattern, if you're using one, onto your gesso covered surface, because once you start putting that paint on there, some of the paint's more opaque than others, and if you cover the lines, you may have to redo them, but in the short term, they're at least a guide for where your color's going to go. And I haven't fully decided if I'm going to do the same colors as I did with the session video, because if I'm using acrylic, I have a little bit more options when it comes to the colors and how they'll interact with the surface. So anyway, you can see how I'm doing this as a good demonstration. I'm not going to make you watch me do the whole thing. I will come back when I have finished transferring this design and show you the next step. Okay, see you in a little bit. Okay, I've got the transfer done, and it slipped around a little bit, but I don't think it's going to be a problem. I had to go over it with pencil a little bit. That's the one thing about transferring on the gesso. I notice it doesn't like to transfer quite as well as, say, on a canvas or plain paper, whatever. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over these lines with some black paint and Mars Black. I would use ivory black, but ivory black I found is kind of transparent, and I really want a nice firm line. Now, I'll go over it again after putting the colors on, because through putting the paints on, it's going to get, you know, a little bit sloppy, a little bit muddled, but I do have to lay down an initial coat, I think, so I have something to follow, because if I get paint on these lines, they're going to disappear, and that's going to be a problem, because I'm not very good at following lines. I'm not good at following lines in the best of situations, but I'm going to do my best. Now, there's a couple different ways we can do this. We can use a finer line brush, or we can use like an angle brush. Now, the advantage of an angle brush is it holds a lot more paint than it appears, and if you put the narrow side down and go like this, you can usually get a pretty good line. I'm not sure. I've not done this kind of pattern before. I've usually done like a landscape or whatever, where I was doing a lot of curvy lines and all that, so I'm not sure how this is going to go, and you're going to find out for the first time with me how this is going to go. So I'm going to start off with, I think, I'm going to go gently at first just to see how it goes, and I've got my trusty cheater here to help me. At least one side will be fairly straight. Not too bad. Not too bad at all. A little bit sloppy there. Not too surprised. Actually, for me, that's pretty good. Uh-oh. Okay. That is not going to work. So, I'll be painting over that, so that's not something we can't fix. Try to go down there straight. The good thing about paint, especially things like acrylic, you can paint over or gesso over and start again. It's not the end of the world if you make a mistake. And also, those little unexpected surprises, Bob Ross handled them pretty well. You can give character to your product. And let's try this one, see how that goes. I could have rehearsed this, but I just felt that wouldn't be genuine. You know, you're going to be experiencing these things yourself, and I think if I portray it as something that comes out perfect right away, it will lead you to believe something that isn't always true. Because you ask any person who paints a lot or does any kind of arts or crafts, things don't always go as planned. And sometimes that helps create new ideas, good ideas, and some not so good. Yeah. The second coat, I'm going to try to find a way to do this a slightly better. When I get colors on there, it might look a little better when there's a little unevenness, but you know, you can see how this is not a project for anyone who is kind of a perfectionist. It's just not going to turn out perfect. I'm okay with that. There's some things I'm a perfectionist about, but painting is not one of them. If it would be, I wouldn't be covered in gesso and have gesso all over my table and everywhere else. Anything I touch, things around the house has some permanent creative colors added to them. Unintentionally, but that's what happens. And so, I'm not going to make you sit through this whole ordeal to get this done, but I wanted you to get an idea of how this may go if you're doing it. If you're doing my design and if you're doing it the way I'm doing it, you will probably encounter a similar experience. Hopefully a better experience, but I wasn't born a painter. I picked it up fairly late in my life experience. I always did pencils and, well, not so much colored pencil, mostly just your basic graphite, various softnesses of lead, shading, that kind of stuff. And it's only in the past few years that I took up acrylics. So I am still learning greatly about how these paints like to behave. Watercolor, that's a whole nother experience for me. With acrylic, you tend to go from dark to light. With watercolor, it's the opposite, light to dark. I have trouble remembering that sometimes, so some of my creations come out quite different than the original intent. But that's okay, because some of those accidents turned out to be interesting and unique. And I don't want my stuff to look like everybody else's. Anyway, I'm going to quit torturing you and let you go for now, and I'll come back when I have this all done and it's drying. Okay, I got the base coat down for the lines. Now, they do look rather rough. The second coat will look a little better. I wanted to mainly just get some lines down as guides for when I put the color on. A lot of those lines will get partially obscured, and then when we go over it again, I will figure out which brush makes the neatest line and the most, what I would call accurate line, and go from there. However, if you're doing this and you find your lines are wavy or whatever and you don't like them, don't get discouraged right away, because your base coats are always what they call the ugly phase of a painting. And I find that's true. Some of the nicest things I've had turn out were the ugliest at this phase. It's something about it, it develops, and you just got to have confidence. And just like anything in life, sometimes your first tries at it don't work out that great, but if you keep working at it, you can achieve a lot more. You just got to hang in there and go a little further. I'm going to clean out my brushes, and when this is all dry, we'll start adding some pretty colors to it. It is time to paint, and I've mulled over how I want to do the colors. I'm not totally satisfied, but let's go see what happens with this. So we're going to start in the middle, because if you don't, it's a good way to end up getting your hand in the paint, and I am real good at doing that, even in the best of scenarios. Use a little bit at a time. Dip my brush. Also, this is probably going to be the hardest part of the whole thing, is staying fairly well in the lines. And as I mentioned before, these are just guidelines, and I'll be going over them again, making them much neater and cleaning up any areas that I accidentally, like there, go over. Now, the texture of this, due to the gesso, it might not be visible, but under my brush you can tell it's wood and gesso. It has a kind of a rough top. If you want a smooth surface, if you're using the same stuff underneath, the gesso and the wood, you can use a leveling gel or something like that, and it will definitely make it much smoother. Problem is with leveling gel, you have to put a few layers on as you go and kind of keep up with it through the painting, and it gets kind of pricey. The leveling gel, even the small jar, is rather expensive, and you're going to need a lot of it if you're going to use it the proper way under a painting. I have done one painting with it, and I liked the results. I did. But I wasn't real happy with how much money I had to put into it. However, if you're painting a picture that you want to enter into one of those contests or something like that, it's probably worth it to spend the money on that. But for a clock that nobody's going to see close up, as in getting right on it and seeing how smooth it is, I think it would be a waste of time and effort. If I was painting a landscape on here, now that would be a different thing. I would probably go that extra extra couple coins and effort to put the leveling gel on, because the texture of this underneath, I think I would struggle to put things like trees or animals or faces or any of that on there. But just your basic shapes like this, I think it'll be just fine. Okay, now this is going to take probably 2 coats of each color, and then when that's done, clean up the lines and then add the clock face. So I'm going to return after I get this painted. You see how this is all going to be the same. It's just going to be different colors and different areas. What I did just now is exactly how I'm going to do the rest of this, and I don't want to keep you bored by watching the whole thing. I'll show you what it looks like when I get done. Alright, we got the base coat down, and it's still in what they call the ugly stage. The base coat's always not perfect, but after that dries, it'll take 1 at least, possibly 2 more layers to look proper. I think it's coming out a little brighter than what I expected, but we'll see what happens after all the coats are down and it's all smoothed out, and you know, as it progresses. That's the fun of art. It turns into something you don't expect sometimes. And the reason I'm leaving my bloopers in, which I make a lot of them, I'm covered in paint, I got paint everywhere, is because I think it's important to know that this process is not a perfect process. Very few people who do painting, even the pros who make a lot of money, have a perfect experience every time. Don't spill paint, don't make a mess, don't get the wrong color, whatever. And I really think honesty is very important, and my thing of doing this is the message, how we take our mistakes and turn them into wins, and how we grow and progress. And I don't think that message would mean a lot if you've never seen me also grow and progress, and that's what I'm trying to do here. So, to not hold you all day wondering what I'm going to do next, I will return when I'm ready for the next coat. I started the second coat for all the colors and didn't film it because I wanted to save this part for last, because I wanted to make a comment about if you have colors that are somewhat transparent and every time you put a coat on it looks like you're not getting anywhere, like you're going to end up having to put 20 coats on to get anywhere with it. I want to show you a little trick. Now, this is not a super transparent color, but I thought it would show up better for the filming. Because it's one thing, the camera doesn't always pick up everything the way I like. So you have your color on your palette. Titanium white, if you add just the very tiniest little bit, it will give some opacity to that color without altering it much. And I'm talking about a very tiny bit. So just that alone, just that little dab, will make that more opaque. So you don't have to put as many coats on. Now if I add more, it will lighten the color up. I do want to lighten it just slightly, because I like the color, but for around the numbers and stuff, I find it just a little bit on the dark side. And I want to be able to see the numbers to some extent. Kind of useless to have a clock that you can't see the numbers on, right? And I wanted to mention, if I did not mention before, the angle brush I found to be better for getting in the little corners. Of course, I'll be crisping them up when I do the black lines over again. But I definitely wanted you to see that little trick there to help you in your painting. Because even though I'm stressing the process and the enjoyment, you still want it to look, you know, kind of nice. I think I'm going to put even more white there. Problem is, it's easy to get too much. So you just kind of got to experiment a little bit until you get to where you kind of know from looking at it. Now that's not a whole lot lighter, but it's just enough that I think I'll have better results with what I'm trying to achieve. Plus the dark underneath will show through possibly a little bit. I don't know. Depends on this paint. I found this purple to be pretty dense. Let's see how it looks. Oh yeah, definitely lighter. And although I don't like the lighter as much as I normally like dark, I like dark purples. I just think for this process, this clock, it is more, see the 4 shows up much better. You know, I want it to be functional as well as kind of expressive of my love of bright color. Because I gotta be careful. I covered up that dark line, but I can recover it again. Because that was just a guide, and even though it will still show through some, when I go to do the lines, I'll show you how I'll make them look much better than what they were. And you just, like before, it's the same technique as doing the first coat, the base coat, except you might want to smooth out the brush lines a little more and all that. But it's easier to smooth them out, because once you get that base coat down, the second coat's a snap usually. And sometimes you do have to put multiple coats. Like I said, the transparent paints, they're going to make you have to do several if you want it to look nice and smooth. If you add the white or just do a couple extra coats, you're going to be just fine. And the kind of paint you use, this Liquitex, that's just it with Liquitex. Some of them are very opaque. One coat and it's pretty much enough. And then I've got others that repeatedly coat after coat after coat, and they're still not the way I want them to be. I don't know if that's where everybody's experiment with Liquitex or just my experience. I suspect it's not just mine. Your more expensive paints also will have some of that quality too. I know that I've heard different artists complain about different brands and their level of opaque or transparent, because transparent paints are desired in some situations. And when I do a landscape and do water, sometimes I like a little more transparent shades of blue, because I can make the shading of the rocks and all that with it much more kind of to the realistic color, where they're varying shades and that varying depths and with shadows and all that. So, you know, a lot of it just experiment. You'll get used to it. And yeah, I think it's a fun process. I find the hours go by. If I've got something I'm particularly worried about when I'm painting, I totally forget about it pretty much. It'll come back when I'm done, but I might be more ready to deal with it then, whatever it is. Sometimes it's something very simple and sometimes it's not. But it seems like art, for me, and for quite a few people, reminds us of the beauty in life when times are not beautiful for us. Perhaps things are going on that are quite stressful, but we can face them a lot better if we got a sound mind, a calm approach to everything, and let those cares drift away just for a little bit. Allow yourself a few minutes to not worry or care about things, just long enough to give your body and mind a break. You can always go back to them later, and hopefully by that time you'll have better resolutions, better solutions. Perhaps the problem will be even gone and things will look a lot better. Anyway, this is almost to the end of the second coat. I'd already done the middle parts, and at this point we are close to done. Let me get that on there. I'll be going over this again, so that won't be a big deal. I've got paper towel. The good thing about purple being somewhat dark, when I put the black line over it, it should work pretty well without having to do it multiple times. Okay, I'm going to let that dry, and when I come back I'll show you how I'm going to do the black lines to crisp them up. I got this cool idea, and I think you're going to find it's a trick that you can use in almost all your artwork, at least when paint or fluid colors involved. Alright, see you in a few minutes. Well, the paint's dry, so I guess that means it's time to start cleaning up those lines on the clock. we're going to cheat and use a little bit of tape to help get those nice and neat and pretty. I have to admit, I cannot do straight lines very well. And I don't know how many people can, but I am going to do it this way. It's really hard to put the tape down as I from the roll. Let's see, I've got a little bit of correcting to do. And if your lines are a little bit crooked due to being from the hand, you may have to mess around with the tape a little bit to get a nice line. I don't leave a very wide line, but they aren't as wide as they appear. Okay, I'm going to widen it a little bit on this side. I want it to show, but I don't want it to be overly bold. Okay, I'm going to reuse my fancy palette here. The Mars Black. I don't know if I mentioned previously the Ivory Black I found to be, when it dries, not opaque enough. It would work if I wanted to put moldable layers on, but I'm not really in the mood for that. And I'm going to use number 5 round Princeton Art and Brush Company. I don't know where I picked that up. I don't even remember buying that brush, but I had to at some point. Okay. I can be a little bit sloppy because I got the paint tape there to protect. I don't want to be sloppy, but, you know, I got the guardrails up there. I can go ahead and go a little bit crazy on it. And it's not going to hurt anything. I'm going to let it set a little bit before moving the tape. I tried removing tape one time with paint still wet, and it was a disaster, so let's let that calm down a bit. I don't know that it has to be completely dry, but it definitely has to be to where when I pull the tape that none of the flow of the paint makes a mess of it. Okay, as soon as that dries enough, I'm going to remove the tape. I'm going to put more tape around on these straight lines. And then for the little lines, I will take shorter pieces of tape. It's going to take a while to do. And I will do the same method, only with a smaller area of focus. Now, if you don't have painter's tape, it's not hard to get. Most of my local stores carry it. Target, Walmart, Lowe's. Oh man, I don't know. I've seen it in a lot of places. I've even seen it in grocery stores. Usually about this width. They also make it all the way to really thick. This is the size I like, which is about 1 inch. Because I can do fine work like this and yet do larger projects if I want to. I don't like the way I put that down, but anyway, if you don't have it, you can use masking tape, which looks very similar. The only thing is you don't want tape that is super sticky because it will pull paint up, and this sometimes does if you're not real careful with it. So I don't press down real hard on it, and I don't let it sit overly long. This is paint tape. Some reason it says it's easily removed, and it is, as long as you keep it fresh. If I let that set for like a week or two and come back, it would be super hard to remove. I don't know what they use on it, but I have had lots of experience with that happening too. When I painted bathrooms or living rooms or whatever, because I don't always pull the tape off right away, and when I do, the paint comes with it. So just something to keep in mind. And the more I look at this, the less I like it. I'm going to keep going over it until I'm satisfied. Anyway, let that dry and I'll show you how it looks. It's going to look a lot neater. And then I'm going to do all the way around without filming the whole thing, because this is going to be a really long project. And after that, I'll show you what I'm going to do before I put the clockwork in. I think this matte finish is nice, but I think I'm going to give it a coat of varnish so it kind of makes those colors pop even more. And then we'll put the Clockworks in and see how it goes. Well, I hope you noticed the lines look a lot crisper. There are a few areas where it's not perfect, but that's partly because of I should have used the tape maybe at the first time. Generally, you know, for something like this, I actually kind of like the hand-drawn look. But if you want to be very exact, I would recommend using the tape for everything. And now I'm going to use a little varnish. Now what I'm using is gloss varnish by Liquitex. It's not absolutely necessary, but what it does is it'll give it a sheen. It also helps preserve the paint colors. When sunlight hits it, it can be hard on them. The bad thing about varnish, for one thing, you want to have a ventilated area. And another thing is that sometimes paint will smear a little bit with varnish. I don't know whether this is going to smear or not, so you're going to see it live if it does. It doesn't take very much, and I'm going to just try to gently do it. Maybe if it's going to smear, it won't smear much. So far it looks okay. Also, it doesn't take very much in a coat, because if you get too much, you're going to have globs, and those dry fairly hard, so you're not going to be able to just wipe them off once they're dry. If I get any globs now, of course, I'm going to wipe them off. I don't know if it shows up on the film or not that it's shinier, but it is. I'm trying to use just what I need. I like it to stretch because, you know, it's not super expensive, but it is sometimes hard to find. I happen to be lucky at the craft store had it in stock. They had 2 bottles, so I got one and left one for another customer to find. And I don't know if they've stocked anymore or not, but you can get it online. If you do, you might want to get a larger bottle to make it worth the shipping to get it, because I think it costs the same to get this size bottle and one that's the size of this gesso. So there. Oops. Normally when I do this, I have a little turntable-like thing I use, and I tape it down, and then I use the turntable to move it around so I have more control. But because it's under the camera, I don't have as much of that. I'm smoothing it out. Now that'll have to dry, and then you can put another coat on. I don't think this one's going to need it, and I don't plan on having it out in the sun much anyway. It'll be like in the living room or someplace like that. But that's all there is for that part, and then the next part we'll be putting in the Clockwork. So I'll see you back when it's dry. Our varnish is dry, so time for the best part, putting our clock together. That's one of the things about varnish, it sticks. Okay, so I want to aim that towards the 12. Put that on. Now, just to be extra sure, I'm going to line it up with that line on there. There we go. Have our little tools. Don't need that paint anymore. I covered it up so I wouldn't put my elbow in it. That would have been entertaining, perhaps. Okay. So I've got to put the washer on. Carefully. Okay, then there's a little flat washer it goes on. Now, I'm going to put, can't remember if it's a second hand or yeah, the small hand goes on first. That's what I thought. The hour hand. Doesn't fit all the way down like you would think it would. I want to double check my work here. Oh, I guess I do put the other I've done this so many times I actually get to where I don't remember it. It's like I get ahead of myself. Okay. So what that nut does is hold that onto the back. There we go. I wouldn't tighten it super tight with a tool because sometimes you strip the thing out, and then if you want to take it apart and put a different clock on there, you're stuck. Okay, put the hand on. I'm checking my loops. I see what's going on. Yeah, that's what was happening. I wanted to make sure that I was seeing that correctly. This littler hand has to fit on a very certain way. And then you aim it all in that direction. Now, if you want the second hand on, you don't put these other screw fixtures on. I'm trying to see. Yeah. I don't know if I like it. So I'm afraid too much of that would be too busy. Since I got such a variety of pattern there, I think it looks busy. Now maybe it doesn't to you, I don't know. But anyway, you want to make sure your hands are not bent in such a way they'll hit each other. This one came out of the package a little bit. Oh boy. If you got fat fingers like mine, putting that on just isn't as easy as it looks in the videos. Alright. That's on. Now, yeah, I like it better without the second hand. If you do that, it just goes on top of there. Let's see if I can manage to put the battery in the wrong way. Ah. Here's a double A. Yeah, that's the correct way. It's just very tight in this new clock mechanism. Now I gotta re-aim it and start it all over again. Without the second hand going, you're not gonna see it move very much, but it is moving. I can tell a little bit, and it's a quiet clock. You can get them that they tick louder. I don't care for a loud ticking clock, especially if I'm gonna put it like in a bedroom or someplace where it's gonna bother me. I can hear it, but it's very, very faint. Anyway, that's our clock project. I hope if you do this project, you come up with a very fascinating design, and I hope you post it somewhere where I can see it. Anyhow, I find it very inspiring, all the bright colors. If my day is dull, I just need to look at the clock, and there it is. You have a great day, and I'll see you in the next project.